Thank you for watching. My name is Glen Morgan, and this is We the Governed. And I appreciate you logging in to watch this video today. My main topic today is going to be about the 2025 off-year elections that happened in Washington State. Just a quick review of some of these results and a quick discussion of exactly what happened in Washington State, focusing on a couple issues that I think matter. I think they'll matter to you. I think they'll matter to the state. And you can decide if you agree with me or not. So I just think that one of the things that happens, these off-year elections, nobody's paying attention. I think it's important to dive into them, see what happened, and then always, as usual, ask, why is it in a state like Washington, where voting is a month-long process, you can sleep on your ballot, you can do all the research you want, you can sit around, leave it on your carport, leave it on your kitchen counter, and eventually finally get around to dropping it off in the mailbox, or if you're going to be safe and actually want to make sure they get the ballot, hand deliver it. And yet this still seems like it was too much work for the majority of Washingtonians once again. And just a quick reminder, if you haven't hit the subscribe and like button, please do so down below. It doesn't cost you anything but a few seconds of your time. If you want to support our channel, you can always do that down in the video description as well. But otherwise, just please share this video with others. Let's help get this word out to more people if you think they'd be interested in knowing what's going on in Washington State. Now, since this is Washington, just nobody can actually accuse Washington State of being Johnny on the spot or getting even remotely close to being quick about any of the results in these elections. And that's because we have roughly a 2-month process. We send out the ballots a month or so in advance, and it takes us about a month to count the ballots or to find and discover mystery secret stashes of ballots. So this is the process that we're under. As you may very well know, and you certainly do if you live here, Washington State is an all mail-in ballot state where anything goes, and it's anyone's guess as to what's actually happening in the black box secret sauce program that we run here. And we do call it snail mail for a reason. If you've made the mistake of trying to use the post office to get your ballots delivered to you, or wondering why you never got ballots in the first place. It's a lot of interesting things that go on in Washington State, and if you're watching this video and you live in a different state, you don't know what I'm talking about, that's okay. You're probably better off for it, but it's worth talking about here anyway. So one of the questions that came up, of course, is the extremely low turnout elections this year in Washington State. So I kind of went back and I looked at this. Now, keep in mind, they still have weeks to count more ballots, discover more secret stashes of ballots like they usually do in King County and elsewhere. But at this point in time, we are kind of getting down to the dregs. These are the last little bits of ballots that they're trying to find here and there. And according to the Secretary of State's office, we are at a 38.35% voter turnout. So that's not very good. However, it's better than last year, which was at 36.41. It's slightly worse than 2021 so far. It's way worse than 2019. It's better than 2017. It's about the same as 2015, and of course you can go back further, 2013, 2011, 2009, and 2007, which is as far back as I went in off-year elections. And when you actually look at all these elections, there were 5 of them that clearly had much higher turnout than we did this year. There were 2 of them that had substantially less turnout than we have had this year, or what it looks like we're going to get to this year. And then 2 of them that I suspect at least one of them will probably get higher than the 2015 elections, and then I don't know if we'll reach the election level of the 2021 elections. So yes, it was a low turnout for sure. It was definitely apathy and ignorance ruled the day in Washington State, and unfortunately that's a characteristic, especially in recent years, that seems to personify our off-year elections in this state. Now, if you want to find out where I got this information, I will provide the link down below for you as well. The Washington Secretary of State website has an election research portion. You can go back and look through many historical election results. I find it quite a useful piece of the state database there. It's actually really worthwhile. I like going through the election research section on what the website, and most of it's online, so you can really go back and look at this. Years ago when I was doing election research, I used to have to go into the archives to pull out old voter pamphlets to look at things. But nowadays, most of it's online. Most of the stuff you're looking for is all there. I find it to be a handy resource, and I will link to that down below, and I think you'll find it worthwhile as well. Now, one of the challenges in an off-year election, and one of the reasons why I believe we have slightly depressed turnout numbers sometimes, is that nearly all these races, with just a few exceptions, are nonpartisan. I put air quotes around nonpartisan. And of course, when you look at the people who are actually on the ballot, you say, are you really nonpartisan? Because you'll see Democrat Party and Republican Party, they will endorse different people, which at least gives you an indication that they're probably partisan in some way. Generally, the Republicans are behind the eight ball, and they don't spend much time vetting or looking at these nonpartisan races. But the Democrats and the progressives and the lefties, they certainly do get into it. And if you pay attention to who's endorsing who, usually gives you a pretty good idea of who exactly those people are, regardless of their pretense with nonpartisanship. Unfortunately, one of the defining characteristics of this year's election appears to be that many people who elected Trump and voted for Trump in our state, and he did not win Washington state, but there were still a sizable number of voters who voted for him. Many of them decided that they elected Trump. He's back in D.C. doing his thing, and so they could just fall asleep and presume that all is well in the world. This is always a problem when you have a savior complex attached to the elected officials who you put in office, so I think this is always a mistake. And unfortunately, some of these recent results clearly indicated that the people who felt that way and who behaved that way helped produce bad results for us. Because what do you think happens to the people who are really annoyed and frustrated about Trump getting elected, like this guy down here? He's angry and he's pissed and he wants to do something about it. So he was motivated and he actually showed up to vote. And so that seems to have determined quite a few of the consequences, because it doesn't take a genius to realize that highly motivated people, no matter how crazy and weird they might be, versus other people who are just asleep at the switch, who do you think actually wins elections? This isn't hard to figure out, and we see it everywhere we look. Seattle had a choice to make this year. You had Bruce Harrell and Katie Wilson running for Seattle mayor. Now, listen, they're both terrible people. They're both horrible as mayor. They both won't do anything good for the city of Seattle. But there is a difference between terrible and just your run-of-the-mill terrible and basically normally corrupt and completely out of control Looney Tunes. So that's really the choice that Seattle had this cycle. Continue with the urban decay program that Bruce Harrell was basically in charge of, where he would at least pretend to care about the future of the city of Seattle, or go down a much darker path where nobody really is sure what the end result will be, but it's probably not going to be good. And of course, Seattle looks like is probably going down that road now. This is, of course, partially again look like Bruce Harrell looked like he was winning on election night, but remember, we've had a week's worth of secret ballot stashes to collecting from whatever happened at the post office. There's almost 270,000 people that have voted in the city of Seattle. That's quite a few people. And the margin of error, or the difference between the two of them, and I'm sure there's a substantial margin of error in here too, is less than 100 votes. And so this very small margin, and this is Katie Wilson here, just basically collecting and surprising with her Democratic Socialists of America supporters as they collect all the secret sauce ballots. Remember, we saw this with Kashama Sawant when she was in the city council. Another crazy person in elected office who has no business being anywhere near a position of responsibility. But nevertheless, she was able to suddenly, in the dead of night, in the secret dead times after the election's over, suddenly seem to find all kinds of mystery ballots that suddenly appeared in the King County Elections Department. And Katie Wilson seems to be inheriting that network and basically doing the same thing to Bruce Harrell. Now, obviously, neither one of them is a Republican. The Republicans really aren't involved in this race, although I would say probably most of them would have shifted into Bruce Harrell's camp, just simply out of a self-preservation angle. However, this was mostly a Democrat-on-Democrat fight, or a socialist-on-Democrat fight, and it looks like the socialist is winning. Now, this isn't the only city getting trashed right now by a bad socialist candidate. We see this happening in other cities, of course, New York being the most obvious. And it is sort of inevitable that when you elect bad people to cities, they'll destroy it. We've seen plenty of evidence like that around town and around our country. It's happened often in the last 100 years. When you elect a bad Democrat to government, they'll pretty much always destroy the city in which they're in charge of. Doesn't matter whether it's Detroit or Democrat New York before Rudy Giuliani came in and cleaned it up. And now we've got Zohran Mamdani that's going to head down that same path and follow in the footsteps of Marx, and proving once again that socialism, whenever it's tried, always fails. Now, the one thing I want to remind people about is that, as Adam Smith said, there's great ruin in a nation. What he really meant was that it sure takes a lot of work to destroy a city, to destroy a nation. There's a lot of infrastructure and history and culture that gets built up over time, and you don't just destroy it overnight, as much as Democrats might try to do that. And the socialists are certainly going to be doing their best to do that as they get in charge, especially in some of these urban centers. But it actually takes a while. I wouldn't actually expect to see the most disastrous outcome of their policy choices and decisions until after they've been in office at least a year, as they go through their purges and their self-destruction, kind of self-immolation mode. It still takes a while for that to percolate into the community, but it is sort of inevitable at this point in time. Now, unfortunately, one of the other things that the Republicans had really tried to focus on, and these were good races to focus on, is they had the opportunity for 2 pickup seats. One potentially in the 5th Legislative District, which Chad Magendas, pictured here, and one in the 26th legislative districts with Representative Caldeer, pictured here, Michelle Caldeer. And unfortunately, in both cases, they did not prevail. So the Republicans did not pick up either one of these seats. And unfortunately, what that means is the legislative session this year will have pretty much the same partisan makeup that it did last year. Not much change. It would have been nice if the Republicans could have picked up a couple of these seats. But again, even though they did a ballot harvesting operation in some of these districts, what it does appear to have happened is, based on preliminary data, it looks like the Republicans were able to get a lot of low propensity voter turnout, a little bit of improvement there, but the higher propensity Republican voter turnout, the ones who voted for Trump and went to sleep, they just didn't show up and vote in this election. And unfortunately, that prevented us from picking up 1 or maybe 2 more seats in the state Senate. So we're going to have another pointless and fairly useless legislative session coming up. That's unfortunate, but that's how it goes, and that's exactly what happened. Now, if you look through some of these other election results, generally when you look around the state, there's a lot of elections because it's, again, an off-year election, mostly county offices, city offices, school boards, port commissions, fire districts, things like that. The Republicans and moderates generally lost a lot of easy races this cycle, races they should have won. Republicans don't hold as many of those positions, and a lot of them lost. Not all of them. There were some good ones that won, but a lot of them lost. And in the infighting melodrama of the Democrat civil war that's going on right now, a lot of the moderate Democrats absolutely lost. So even if it doesn't appear that the partisan makeup of a given so-called nonpartisan position changed too much in a city, they oftentimes elected the worst person they could find in that specific position. However, Republicans did win a little over half of the contested school board races this cycle, so that probably bodes well in some of these school districts. It'd be nice if they won more, but it looks like they've won over half, and that's probably that they were attempting to contest. And that sort of speaks to just the boys and girls sports issue and the recent attention to the complete collapse of all educational standards associated with the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction and Chris Reichdahl's just atrocious leadership that he's had since he's been there. So a lot of school boards are trying to push back. There were many good candidates. Again, as I mentioned earlier, they did win the races, but most of them did not. And unfortunately for us, most moderate Democrats were generally defeated when they were faced by lefties or nasties when they were contested in their community. Again, nonpartisan positions, I'm sure everybody kind of on the left went to the same meetings, but you saw the Democrat Socialists of America have generally taken over a large portion of the Washington State Democrats, so I'm not sure that we can really tell the difference between them anymore moving forward. There were clear exceptions to this around the state. I think the city of Yakima race was interesting because there's been 3 election cycles now in these off-year elections in the city of Yakima, and the Republicans have essentially gone through and swept out all the Democrats that had basically been trying to destroy that city in the past. This includes actually the former mayor who I did a video about, who had tried to get signature gatherers arrested at the Walmart in Yakima. She lost her mayor's race and position, and then now she got kicked off the city council by the voters as well. So there were good changes in some places. City of Yakima is not alone in this, but it was one that stood out to me as I was taking a look. Now, the other place I looked was, some of you might know this, and I'll give you a little bit of background. There's 39 counties in Washington state. 7 of those counties have reorganized in a different form of local governance called Home Rule Charter. It was approved by the voters of Washington state, and it was allowed actually as a state constitutional amendment back in 1949, and so it allowed counties to become what's called home rule charter instead of a commission structure, which was the traditional structure for most county governments in Washington state since statehood. So of the 39 counties, 7 counties over the years have become what's called home rule charter county. So Whatcom County, Snohomish, Pierce, King, Clark, and then you have San Juan and Clallam County. So there's just a number of these counties that have made this choice. And what that means is that every 10 years or 5 years, depending on which county you're in, they elect what's called a charter review commission. And so this charter review, it consists usually of about 15 people, in most cases, not always. I know there's some differences county to county. And then those people, those citizens get together and they spend 6 months to a year, depending on the nature of what they're doing in their county, and they review their county charter and they make amendments to it or changes. Those changes can't be approved by those people completely, but they are originally drafted and created there, and then that goes before the voters for them to decide. So a charter review is actually very important, and who gets on that commission is very important. So there were 3 major charter review commissions that were being voted on this year. We had Snohomish, we had Pierce, and we had Clark County. And in all 3 of these counties, a lot of very good charter review members got elected to the commission. So those commissions will be starting to form at the very end of this year, beginning next year, depending on, again, what they're doing in each county. In particular, Snohomish and Clark looks like they've got a majority of conservative or good governance sort of people, but even Pierce got a number of really good people in there as well. So the good job, surprisingly good job, probably the first time that I've ever seen this happen before, where there was a concerted effort and it wasn't 100% successful in every position, but it does look like they made some progress there, and it'll probably make quite a difference going down the road with the governance of these counties, provided they're able to pass good local charter amendments. Which brings me to Whatcom County, all the way up north, because Whatcom County had their charter review commission just this last year here in 2024. So they were elected, a little while ago, and last year they put together charter amendments, which were on the ballot this year in 2025. And this really matters to me because 10 years ago, give or take, during the last Charter Review Commission, I was actually involved in trying to help some of the people on that Charter Review Commission with a couple of charter amendments. And so I remember some of the drama and the effort and the work they went into getting this done behind the scenes. And I hadn't paid as close attention to what they were doing this year. I had heard some good things. I knew some good activists that were working on it. And they actually surprisingly did a pretty impressive job based on what I read on the charter review amendments that showed up on the ballot in Whatcom County. And a beautiful Bellingham Bay with Mount Baker there behind it. And let's look at some of these charter amendments that actually passed with overwhelming majorities in Whatcom County. And one of them was, for instance, the decision to establish performance audits. It was called Prop 3, and 85% of the voters in Whatcom County approved that. And keep in mind, when you get that kind of number in an election result, that means that you had all the Republicans and a good sizable chunk of Democrats who joined on this issue and voted in favor of it. That's a very surprising number for a charter amendment. They also passed a charter amendment, Prop 4, that more specifically and in more detail clarifies the power and the duties of each of the elected officials. This is actually a good thing because it avoids future legal battles or fights or questions as to whether somebody's breaking the law with the decisions that they're making and then it's not staying in their lanes. When it's well defined within the charter, that it makes it much easier for governance to be functioning moving forward. It doesn't create utopia. It doesn't prevent bad people from doing bad things, but it certainly makes a much clearer delineation between what they should be doing versus what they're not allowed to do. And to get 92% of the community to vote for it, that's a very good common sense charter amendment. They also had a amendment that essentially created a very protective change to the initiative process in the sense of preventing the county commission from going in and manipulating, interfering with, or silencing the local initiative process. If you've ever read some of the stuff I've written over the last number of years, one of the failed promises and the broken promises of local charter amendments and home rule charter in general is that the initiative process is essentially designed to be fake. It doesn't really work because there's a number of different games that corrupt elected officials can do to kind of head it off at the pass and manipulate the results. And this charter amendment, very specifically in Whatcom County, ended up actually passing with 60% of the vote, and it prevents the commission or the county commissioners from providing alternative versions of an initiative to confuse the voters. It prevents them from stopping the initiative getting to the voters, which the previous Whatcom County Council had done before, and it prevents them from changing the language on the initiative, which is very nasty. And it's just a good little initiative. Prop 7 is a good government initiative for sure. Then we also had Prop 8, which is budget transparency and timeliness. I mean, who would have thought? Making them actually submit the budget 6 months in advance and putting it all online so everybody can see it. Again, 93% of the vote. And another one that was sort of related to that, Proposition 9, requiring that if there's going to be a change in budget, that they have to do quarterly updates on where they're at in the budget process by department, online, visible, and transparent for everybody in advance if they're planning to make any significant changes to that budget. Again, this is good governance. This is a conservative thing, but obviously they got both liberals and conservatives to vote for it. I don't know who the 7% were that voted against it, but they probably work up there at Western. Then you also had one that's probably not quite as important, but I still think it was a good one, clarifying the rules of a charter commission, meaning this is Proposition 10. And this really came out of more of a dispute that the Whatcom County charter group basically had when they first got together. And it was some debates about what the rules of the charter commission were going to be. This is a common problem. I've seen this before in other charter commissions, and they get in, they have to determine the rules, and it's basically saying, hey, we're going to follow Robert's Rules of Order, or we're going to make up some different version of that ourselves. It's always better, by the way, if you follow Robert's Rules of Order, but nevertheless, the new commission each 10 years in Whatcom County gets to kind of set those ground rules in the beginning, and whoever's basically the commission chair and can get the majority of the votes, they get to set the rules. And that amendment there is basically saying you need to define what those are going to be in advance so that people don't get surprised later on. Probably the least significant of the ones that I like here, but it was still an interesting one. And then finally, the other one that I liked, the seventh one that was interesting to me and unusual, was Proposition 12, which was requiring that every time Whatcom County is going to come up with some kind of new scheme, plan, central planning scheme, whatever it is they're going to throw at the people who live there, that it's going to require them to do a land analysis, supply validation, understanding construction costs and impacts to the community. 86% of the people agreed with it, which is amazing because this is definitely a very conservative sort of approach. But I also think that one of the reasons why it passed so easily is because of the incredibly high cost of living that's accelerated up in Whatcom County. It really is a direct result of the central planning schemes that the geniuses in Bellingham and Whatcom County have thrown together with some of their gangrene crew, and it's produced very negative results on the availability and supply of housing and the ability to build new homes, and it's made it very difficult for people to afford to live in Whatcom County. So I think that proposition reflects it. And all in all, 7 amazing improvements that were passed on these charter amendments. There were others that also were rejected that I think should have been rejected, and that was surprising to see as well. There were a couple that were, there's another one I think that was passed that didn't seem to be that important or significant to me, but nevertheless, this was a big deal. And what's even more surprising about it really is that they didn't necessarily go into this charter review process with an obvious majority of conservative limited government kind of people. So to get this kind of result clearly speaks very well for some of the activists and some of the members on that Charter Review Commission herding the cats, keeping people focused, and passing stuff that obviously, based on this voting results, are super popular, even in Whatcom County. And to get results like this means that you not only had Republicans supporting them, you also had a large number of Democrats supporting them as well. So it was very surprising that Whatcom County had such good results with their charter amendment process this year. Now, of course, there's other election results that happen around the state. I'm not going to get into as much detail on these, but these certainly merit review. And I'll wait until I get the final secret stash of ballot process before I probably get back to a couple of these stories. But one of them that was interesting was this Olympia's Prop 1, which is essentially a big grab bag. It was sold under the idea of raising the minimum wage in Olympia, but it actually was a big grab bag of union demands, pushed by, of course, a lot of public sector unions, and it failed in Olympia, which is very union-friendly and very liberal, very leftist, and it failed with 52% of Olympians voting against it, which means all the Republicans voted against it, and a bunch of Democrats came in and voted against it as well. This was more indicative probably of the two different problems that the Democrats had in Thurston County. One is just the divisions that are clearly appearing and the civil war that's going on inside the Democrat Party, and this was a casualty of that civil war, a good one, if you ask me. But it's also just an indication that there's trouble in paradise, certainly on the Democrat side. Another element to that was also the Yelm School District levy, which is still a pretty big school district in Thurston County. This is their fourth levy failure in a row. Again, 52% of the people voted against that levy despite everything that the WEA threw at it, Washington Education Association, the teachers union, to get that one across the finish line, and they still failed for the fourth time in a row. What this means is that the voters who live out in Yelm, or the property owners anyway, are going to experience a 38% cut in their property taxes coming up this next year. Basically because they've rejected the levy long enough that the year of previous levies they're gonna go away, and so they can't legally collect levies anymore. And local levies tend to be about 38% of your property tax value. That's going to make it particularly difficult now for the Yelm School District to ever pass a levy in the future, because it won't be a maintenance levy anymore. It'll be we're going to increase your property taxes by 38% levy. It was impressive that happened 4 times in a row. There is some discussion about the Yelm School District going bankrupt. There's other problems going on. And remember, this ended up starting because the Yelm School District, based on what the activists are telling me who live there, is that it became too woke. The school became way too woke. They became very non-transparent, very deceptive in what they were doing. They weren't doing a good job educating the kids, and that eventually drove that community to vote against that levy now 4 times in a row. And whether or not the school district goes bankrupt, school districts don't totally go bankrupt. They may be acquired by a nearby school district, but that means that nearby school district's also going to be acquiring these voters who are going to have a taste of tax freedom on their property, and they're not going to be likely to support a new school district's levies either. So we're really into some interesting territory here in Yelm. And additionally, at the state level, the constitutional amendment was a Senate Joint Resolution 8201, which is going to allow the state to take some of the money that comes in from one of the payroll taxes, and instead of keeping it in pretty safe, predictable funds to be available to be squandered and wasted the way the state would normally waste it, they're going to hand it over to Trust Us, a group of people who really know how to invest their money and hopefully get higher returns. That's the theory behind it. The concern has been, and the reason why I voted against it, is you can never trust the bureaucrats or anybody in Olympia really not to politicize and corrupt the process. And if the unions are involved and the special interests, they will definitely influence investment decisions. And like California, we'll probably see a good chunk of this money get lost when it gets invested in some kind of green new scam or something like that, and the money goes away. But that did pass by 57% in Washington state, and you actually had a mixed bag on both sides, Democrats and Republicans on both sides of this issue, but the unions were on the side of pushing it, so that's what got passed. Now, obviously, a good percentage of Washington state voters, when you look at the incredibly low turnout numbers, clearly were asleep at the switch. And unfortunately, for those of us who care about liberty and freedom, a good chunk of these people were actually people who probably supported Trump and or more smaller government, more limited government. And they thought that somehow things were just going to change because they slept on the couch and didn't bother to fill out that ballot. That's a problem, because that's when you get guys like this who is very happy to step into that vacuum and show up and make sure that he's running the government instead of somebody sane and normal. We'll see that in several of these cities with some of the clowns that have recently been elected. And it's just what happens when you don't show up. Now, remember, I talk about this all the time, and when it comes to elections, it's not utopia. It's not a perfect process, but it's certainly better than sitting back and letting crazies take over your government. Nobody really wants to live in Detroit when the Democrats take over. Nobody's going to enjoy living in Manhattan after Mondami's gotten done with harming as many people as he can there. And this is just the way things happen. But you have to be involved and ready to turn the ship around. If you want better results, you have to be willing to show up. Sleeping on the couch all day and presuming that Trump's going to come save you, not a good plan as a general rule. So that's what we're looking at right now. I might dig into that Yelm levy one. One of the story, it's kind of an interesting story by itself. I will tell you that the Democrats in Thurston County probably didn't help themselves by hiring a convicted child predator who basically managed their political campaigns. That just, even though I know most of those guys are usually Democrats, it doesn't seem like it's a wise idea to hire them and put them out there front and center and bring them to school buildings, which is what they did. So anyway, things like that are going to make a difference. Showing up makes a difference. If you don't like the way these election results turned out, then get involved and next time show up. Because, as I always say, the future belongs to those who show up.